Coming up, the top diplomats of South Korea and China hold talks to follow up on last month's summit in Indonesia between Presidents Yoon and Shi. A range of topics were discussed, from North Korea's nuclear threats to boosting economy cooperation between Seoul and Beijing. American consumers see inflation slowing down in 2023. This according to a survey from New York Federal Reserve. Respondents said they saw one-year inflation running at 5.2%, down sharply from the 40-year highs seen throughout 2022. Plus, today is a big day for BTS oldest member Jin as he starts his 18-month-long mandatory military service. He'll be admitting into a basic training camp in South Korea. We have a military expert to tell us what that means. Good morning. Welcome to New Day at Arirang. We begin as the foreign ministers of South Korea and China discuss the two countries' latest interests and pending issues. They were a follow-up to the summit between their leaders in Bali last month. Our Kim Da-mi starts us off.
The two top diplomats of South Korea and China have agreed to stay in close contact so that the momentum built up between their countries' leaders can continue and potentially facilitate a visit from Xi Jinping to South Korea. Park Jin and Wang Yi sat down on Monday, this time virtually, to evaluate the summit held on the sidelines of G20 last month. It was seen as a crucial milestone in a new era of South Korea-China cooperation based on mutual respect and common interests. DFMs then settled on speeding up high-level talks even more, including visits to each other's country. They will also accelerate consultations for the adoption of a joint action plan for the future development of South Korea-China relations, which Park proposed during their last meeting back in August. Korean Peninsula issues atop the agenda, with Park emphasizing that South Korea-China cooperation is needed more than ever, as bringing North Korea back to denuclearization talks is a common interest. Wang responded that Beijing will play a constructive role in dealing with issues on the peninsula. Also on the table included expanding of flight routes and revitalizing exchanges of cultural content. Back in 2017, China unofficially banned all things Hallyu following South Korea's decision to deploy the U.S. missile defense system THAAD, which China regards as a threat because of its powerful radar systems. Seoul has long requested that Beijing lift its ban on Korean cultural content. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
The European Union has imposed more sanctions on those responsible for or involved in the development of ballistic missiles. According to the European Council on Monday, the EU has imposed fresh sanctions against 8 individuals and 4 entities linked to the North's missile program. Among the sanctions entities, the EU included 2 oil tankers and delivery vessels. North Korea's Ministry of Rocket Industry was added for its role in procuring finance and components for use in the development of missile and nuclear technology. The EU's measures on Monday totaled 73 individuals and 17 entities. The bloc also called on North Korea to comply with its obligations under international law and resume dialogue with relevant parties. American consumers expect inflation to gradually come down in 2023. According to a survey by the New York Federal Reserve, respondents see one-year inflation running at 5.2%, the lowest level since August 2021. Our Lee Seung-jae has the details.
According to a New York Federal Reserve survey released on Monday, U.S. consumers are more optimistic about inflation in November due to expectations that both food and energy price increases will be less severe next year. The survey of consumer expectations showed respondents see one-year inflation running at 5.2%, down 0.7 percentage points from October's reading. The reading is also the lowest since August 2021, when inflation began gripping the U.S. and the Fed began to aggressively hike rates. The New York Fed also says consumers expect big drops in food prices in a year from now. Home price increases are also expected to slow. American consumers also lowered their expected inflation for 3 years from now, expecting 3% compared to 3.1% in October, while their expected inflation 5 years from now was 2.3%, down 0.1 percentage point from the previous outlook. The report comes ahead of this week's FOMC meeting, where Fed officials are widely expected to moderate the pace of their aggressive campaign of rate hikes. They're expected to raise the key interest rates by 50 basis points from the previous 75 basis point increases. The Federal Reserve believes consumer expectations on inflation is a good indication that its aggressive rate hikes are working, as the Fed hopes to achieve its inflation target of 2%. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The nation's exports are down so far this month compared to a year ago, mainly on a decline in shipments of semiconductors, the country's biggest export item. Korea Customs Service says exports in the first 10 days of the month were down 20.8% to $15.4 billion. Shipments of semiconductors fell nearly 28%. By destination, exports to the largest trading partner, China, dropped by more than 34%. So far this year, South Korea recorded an all-time high trade deficit of $4.9 billion. South Korea's exports of vehicles rose to an all-time high last month thanks to brisk demand for eco-friendly cars overseas. This was despite unfavorable factors like rising interest rates and logistics disruptions from the recent trucker strike. Our Shin Se-byuk has the details.
South Korea's auto exports in November reached an all-time high, thanks mostly to solid demand for eco-friendly cars and improving supplies of semiconductors. Data from the Trade Ministry shows that for 5 months in a row, both export value and volume have marked an on-year rise. In terms of volume, nearly 220,000 cars were sold overseas, up 25%, marking a record high. The value of auto exports last month came in at $5.4 billion, up 31% on year. All despite factors such as interest rate hikes and logistics disruptions from the trucker strike that began late last month. The record figure came on the back of brisk overseas sales of eco-friendly cars, which take up well over 1/5 of the country's total. As for units sold, it saw on-year growth of nearly 15%, with over 50,000 units shipped abroad. In terms of value, it jumped over 20% on year, reaching an all-time monthly high of just under $1.5 billion. In particular, shipments of electric and hydrogen cars came in at $800 million, also hitting all-time records. And experts attributed the rise to the improved quality of South Korean-made cars.
South Korean car makers have been striving to improve their quality, especially their luxury brands. Because of that, Korean-made EVs are now enjoying growing popularity globally.
Meanwhile, auto production and domestic sales also showed a strong performance in November. Domestic sales jumped 8.4% and production was up over 25%. With such record-breaking figures coming out month after month, the Trade Ministry expects the value of auto exports for 2022 as a whole to surpass $50 billion for the first time. As of the end of November, overseas sales had reached worth $48.7 billion. The same expert said he expects the current trend will continue at least until the first half of 2023, citing South Korean car makers' strong performances in both production volume and quality management. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
Recent years have seen rapid growth in so-called wellness tourism as people spend more on their health. South Korea has been developing its own industry by promoting local destinations where people can enjoy the natural environment. Our Shin Ha-young has the details.
More people are making healthy living a priority. One of the rapidly growing lifestyle industries is wellness tourism, where people go on trips to improve their body and mind. According to the Global Wellness Institute, the market is expected to hit $1.1 trillion by 2025, with an average annual growth of almost 21%. Considering the potential of this market, the Korea Tourism Organization has selected 58 wellness tourism spots in South Korea under 4 categories: beauty and spa, traditional Korean medicine, nature and forest, and healing and meditation. Museum Han is one of the attractions. It's surrounded by mountains and is well known for meditation. In this hall, you can meditate in various ways to get positive energy and feel refreshed. One of the options is singing bowl silent meditation. With the vibration of the singing bowl, visitors can focus entirely on themselves. Visitors can also commune with nature as the arc-shaped window allows sunlight into the gray hall. The James Turrell Exhibition Hall is another quiet and contemplative space where people can feel refreshed while looking at sunrise and sunset. Visitors can also experience a moment of disorientation in a chamber filled with only lights.
South Korea has 4 distinct seasons. The museum combines architecture, nature, and art together for tourists to recognize the changes in seasons.
The South Korean government has been focusing on boosting its wellness travel industry.
The Yoon administration announced the promotion of wellness tourism as one of the national administrative tasks. The tourism ministry is planning to push for legislation that would provide systematic support to the industry.
With the ministry planning to inject more money into wellness tourism next year, the industry is expected to boom over the coming years. 신하영, Arirang News, 원주.
The South Korean film Decision to Leave has been nominated for Best Picture Non-English at the 80th Annual Golden Globe Awards. On Monday, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association announced the nominees. Decision to Leave by renowned South Korean filmmaker Park Chan-wook was among 4 other non-English films, including RRR, a popular Indian film, as well as the German film All Quiet on the Western Front. Bong Joon-ho's Oscar-winning Parasite won this same award in 2020, making it the first Korean film ever to win a Golden Globe, while Minari won the following year. The Bashness of Inisherin is the most nominated film this year with 8 nominations. The winners will be announced during the ceremony on January 10th. BTS member Jin will be enlisted in the army today, not as in his band's fan-based army, but for his 18-month military service. According to the Korean Army, the oldest member of BTS will enter a boot camp at sometime before 2 p.m. for basic training before being assigned to a local unit. Sources suggest the boot camp is a frontline army division in Yeoncheon, just north of Seoul. The agency managing BTS has requested that fans and the media refrain from visiting, citing safety concerns. But to prevent any accidents, the Korean Army will run an emergency situation center on site. Jin, 30 years old, is the first member of the K-pop sensation to serve in the military, which is mandatory for all able-bodied men in South Korea. And with that being said, we want to connect with a well-respected retired Army general who can tell us what Jin will face during his time in the South Korean Army. I'm pleased to say we have Chun In-bum, a former commander of the ROK Special Forces, joining us this morning. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
First, many are wondering what's in store for Jin with his mandatory military service. Can you walk us through what it's probably going to be like for him, at least for the basics training?
Basic training in the Korean military will last for 6 weeks. So this week and next week, it'll be basically for him to get a very simplified physical checkup, changing into uniform, packing his old civilian stuff to back home, things of that nature. He will also get an attribution test to see what kind of qualifications are good for him. Then they will start in earnest military training from the second week, which will consist of physical training and so forth. About the second and third week, they will decide, most probably by lottery, whether he will stay within the 5th division, which is the division that he is now going to receive basic training, or will be sent to another unit adjacent to that division. Once that is done, around the 4th or 5th week, he will be again taking another chance with his lotto number, and he will be assigned to another unit where he will get his military specialty, whether it's going to be a rifleman or an engineer, or he could be in a military band, but that decision will be made just before he finishes his basic training, and that consists of the 6-week cycle that he will be experiencing.
Right, I mean, looking at the footages brings the memories back for myself as well from 10 years ago. But like you said, what are some of the options for Jin? You've mentioned a few when it comes to being assigned to a specialty.
Well, there are more than 20 specialties in the Korean military. It's called military occupational specialties, MOSs. So among these MOSs, a private like Jin will be looked at for his physical, his aptitude, what kind of education that he's had. And because of his musical background and his senior age, because 30 years old is pretty old in the military. Normally it's 22 or 21. So because of his older age, all of that will be taken into consideration. And he will have the opportunity to make a choice. And when all of these are compiled, and because there might be a competition, if there is a competition, it's all done by lotto. So that will decide what his military occupation will be.
Right, and finally, on a more serious point, inter-Korean tensions are at a highest point not seen in recent times. Will this massive attention focus on the South Korean army due to Jin's admission likely to affect the South Korean military's readiness in any way?
Not at all. I think that rather the opposite, because of Jin, or Kim Seok-jin, as his real name is, as he shows that he is willing to serve in the military like anyone else, it will boost morale and actually improve the readiness of the Korean military. It just shows that Korea is a fair society and that nobody can be exempt from duties that are bound to them.
Right, I mean, General, Jin has at least you to thank even a bit for all your hard work as a general for improving the lives of the soldiers while you were serving. So it's good to hear from you about this topic, and I hope you have a great day, General.
Thank you for saying that. You too.
Now, for a look at news from around the world, we turn to our Matthew Ashley, standing by at the Arirang newsroom. Good morning.
Good morning, Toyon.
Let's start in Europe, where 4 people have been charged for allegedly receiving bribes meant to influence decision-making by the EU.
Well, that is right. 4 people have been charged by a judge after prosecutors seized roughly $630,000 across a raid last Friday of 16 houses in the Belgian capital of Brussels. Now, the suspects are accused of accepting bribes from Qatar in an attempt by the Gulf state to influence the European Parliament. Qatar denies any wrongdoing. Among those arrested was the European Parliament's Vice President Eva Kaili. The scandal has rocked the EU, undermining its credibility. Speaking about the arrests and the accusations, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called them, quote, very serious, and said a new ethics body should be established. Turning over to Peru now, where at least 2 people have been killed and 20 injured amid protests in the city of Andaluz. Now, Peru has seen protests across the country since Thursday following the impeachment of former President Pedro Castillo. Castillo was impeached and jailed over alleged attempts to start a coup d'etat. He had announced plans to dissolve Congress and install an emergency government as he faced an incoming impeachment vote. Now, newly appointed President Dina Boluarte, the country's 6th president in 5 years, has promised to hold a presidential vote in 2024. Now, Iran has carried out its second execution related to the nationwide anti-government protests. 23-year-old Majid Reza Ranavad was hanged in public from a crane in the city of Mashhad on Monday local time, after being found guilty of enmity against God. This for allegedly killing 2 members of the paramilitary Basij resistance force. His execution comes only 23 days after his arrest. His family were not told until after he was killed. Human rights groups say that arrested protesters are being given sham trials with no proper legal representation or due process, and several have been sentenced to death. Now, the protests were sparked by the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini in mid-September after she was detained by Iran's morality police for not wearing a hijab correctly. And finally, in a move signaling a shift away from its stringent zero-COVID policy, China has deactivated its national COVID-19 app that tracked the movements of its people during the course of the pandemic. The app went offline on Monday evening local time after being in operation for 3 years. Previously, the app was needed to travel between states and cities, but since restrictions on travel have been eased, officials have deemed the app no longer necessary.
Good morning. Some very rough winter weather is in the forecast all day today. Let's talk about toxic smog first. Despite a huge drop in the readings that's right ahead of us, we'll be covered with unhealthy levels of yellow dust all day, with the capital region under fine dust warnings and advisories this morning. In making matters worse, it will only get more dusty as the day goes on. And about the snow, clouds are dropping a mix of rain and snow on central parts of the country, with a heavy snow advisory already been issued for parts of Gyeonggi-do, Gangwon-do, and the Chungcheong-do provinces. Please expect to see up to 10 centimeters of snowfall if you are there. The rest of Chungcheong-do and Jeollabuk-do provinces could be seeing up to 8 centimeters. Elsewhere, we could receive up to 5 centimeters, and that's including here in Seoul. Afternoon highs in the central region will be much colder this afternoon, topping out at 3 degrees here in Seoul, only at 2 degrees over in Chuncheon. Then please brace for season's coldest temperatures tomorrow morning, and it's going to stay bitterly cold through the weekend. With that in mind, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
And that wraps up today's New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for our Wednesday's edition at the same time. Please stay with Arirang News, though, for more updates throughout the day. Have a lovely day or evening wherever you are, and take care.
백섬에